Corrections has admitted it has acted outside of the law by confining women to their cells at Auckland Women's prison for more than 23 hours a day. Women at the jail, 67% of whom are Māori, have been denied their minimum entitlement to 1 hour out of their cells for exercise on multiple occasions this year, including 16 times in just a 2-week period. That sparked an internal corrections review, which was released this week. It described a punitive culture at the jail, dysfunctional management and a lack of health staff to care for the women inside. RNZ's Guyon Espiner, who broke the story, asked Corrections Chief Custodial Officer Neil Beales why they are breaking the rules at the country's largest women's prison.
There are definitely cases where it hasn't happened as it should do. You've spoken to the Regional Commissioner earlier. They've owned that, they've acknowledged that there are certain things that weren't happening that should have been happening. I can tell you now that it's not happening right now at this site.
It's not happening now, but the example I gave, which was between March 29 and April 10, it happened 16 out of 30 times they looked at.
There are times when actually breaching a minimum entitlement isn't actually breaking the law, because there are certain occasions under the law where you're actually allowed to breach minimum entitlements. That could be for health and safety reasons, it could be for a security issue at the prison, or to prevent harm to somebody else. But particularly in COVID, we were affected quite heavily by that, where because of the use of bubbles and restricting space between people, unfortunately there were times when we could not meet those minimum standards.
Yes, but you had this lock-up regime before COVID.
Which is why I'm saying you're correct, you're going over a span of time. So I would have to have a look at those 16 incidents to see, well, what happened in that unit on that day? Was there an incident where they had to lock down? Was it a case of somebody, for argument's sake, in the management unit creating a disturbance, a protest, where they then couldn't get out of their cell, but it's been recorded?
But you didn't record them.
Correct. So we have an issue, so there's two folds here, right? There's an issue in terms of the 16, and as I said, one of the things that we found here, and in some of the other sites as well, is that I couldn't gain assurance from some of the data that was provided to me as to the rationale behind some of the unlocks, because the recording wasn't as accurate as what I would expect it to be.
So you can't sit here today confidently and say that you haven't broken the law, not you personally, but that the law hasn't been broken at this prison, because you've locked women up for more than 23 hours at a stretch, we acknowledge that, and you do not have the assurance that it was done in line with the Corrections Act 2004.
Over the period of time you're talking about, that is correct. There are times there when I just don't have the data available, or the depth in the detail of the data to be sure that the rationale behind the instance that you're talking to would give me satisfaction that the law hasn't been breached. And
what are you going to do about that?
Well, a lot's been done about it already. I mean, obviously you've been with us today, you've spoken to the Regional Commissioner and the Prison Director. I can tell you now at this prison, the data is accurate. I've had a look at it today myself. People are getting their minimum entitlements. There are, even in the high security unit, where people are getting out for at least an hour and a half just for exercise, there are prisoners in there who are also getting out for other activities as well, such as programs.
Sure, and there's some great stuff being done here. I've seen it with my own eyes, so I acknowledge that. But who was responsible for the fact that these women were having their minimum entitlements breached?
So there's a range of people, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we as a department, we've got to own that, right? So I'm not particularly interested right now on hauling somebody up and dealing with one specific person. I think collectively we've got to own this as a department.
How long had that been going on?
In what area?
The fact that you were locking women up for more than 23 hours and didn't know why.
I can't tell you, because I looked at it at the moment in time.
But weeks or months or years?
Well, we'd have to go back and track that data, right? So I was looking at that as a moment in time, knowing what we were facing and knowing what we were likely to be facing as COVID continued, making sure that the actions that we are taking, as far as we practically and operationally can do, make sure that people are getting the minimum entitlements.
Why are you locking women up for 22.5 to 23 hours a day in the high security unit?
They get an hour and a half out for exercise, but there are many others who are getting out in addition to that for programs and for workshops and for other activities. So it's not entirely true to say that high security you get locked down for 23.5 hours or 22.5 hours. That hour and a half that they're giving them is purely just for exercise. They also get, not all of them, and there will be various reasons for some of them. Some of them refuse to work, some of them can't work, so they've got gang issues, you can't unlock them with other people, there might be health issues or whatever. But when you unlock people, you've got to then have the staff to supervise them, and you've got to put them somewhere to do something.
In that unit there were 90 women, right?
Mm.
How many of those roughly would be locked down for 22, 23 hours a day?
I'd have to get you those figures.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
But why are any of those women being locked down for that long? I mean, if you look at the Mandela rules, the United Nations definition, 22 hours a day without meaningful human contact is considered solitary confinement. Why are we locking down women for 22, 23 hours a day? Okay. Why?
Because to have them wandering around the yards, in each other's faces, becoming violent, hostile with each other because there isn't anything else for them to do at that moment in time, is probably worse for them, right? So if they're in their cell, they've got their TV, they've got their books, you know, they're not sitting in a barren cell with nothing. Now,
is that an ideal way to run a prison, though? How can you expect people to rehabilitate if they're locked down for 23 hours in a day?
Well, ideally, that's why you want people to attend their programs. You want them to go to work and workspace, and this jail does a lot of that. You've seen some of it today, right? So the more people you can get to do that, the better. But there are some people who we can't do that with because of the nature of their offending, the type of hostility or aggression that they may cause on the outside, whatever that issue may be. At all levels, nobody has the intention of coming down and going, I'm just going to lock you up and forget about you. Nobody wants to do that. We want to find people who are motivated, who want to do programs, who want to get engaged. That group that you saw today, they all came from high security. They're all high security prisoners, right? In the AOD group that you saw there. We need more of that. Now, what was the one thing when you said, what could be different? What was the one thing that you heard from the tutor? We want it to be longer. You know, so we want more programs like that, but all that comes with investment. It costs money. You need space to do that, and you also then need the right people to be able to engage in those programs. That's the reality of prison, Guyon. Is that unfortunately, as much as people like yourself, people like me, the staff out there, they would like to do more. You're restricted by certain, you know, issues: money, space, time, and then the very real issue about dealing with some people who are hard to manage, and when you unlock them with other people, becomes quite dangerous for those and for the staff who manage them. These are the dynamics of running prison.
And that was Corrections Chief Custodial Officer Neil Beales speaking to Guyon Espiner.